So that's all I'm going to say. That's like a heads up at the beginning of the call, at the beginning of this call. Yeah, it feels like a call, actually. Before we get into it. But without further ado, sorry, I've already spent 8 minutes.
You love a preamble.
Are you still there, Alex, or are you falling asleep?
No, I'm still awake. Just about.
Let's have a sip of tea. And let's get into the 5 facts of the week, which you don't. Do you know what they are? Have I posted them anywhere? I don't think I have.
No.
So we're going to start with one. The first one is actually in the rental market, and these are in no particular order. These are just 5 facts, in no particular order, that have influenced, that I think are relevant news in the housing market. Now, the first one is about. So Goodlord, which is a provider of technology to lettings agents, was talking about how they have a monthly rental index. And they're talking about how rents rose to a new 7-month high, but the rise is slowing a little bit. And most importantly on here, they talk about voids lengthening. Now, a void period is the period that a landlord has their property sitting empty in between tenants. And voids across England lengthened during May, hitting an average of 21 days. And this is a rise from 19 days to 21 days. So that's an that's an over 10% increase in the average void period in a month. I think that's significant. Average voidage, there's a word I didn't know existed, voidage. It's now 11% higher than the same time last year, suggesting a slight lessening of the imbalance between demand and supply. Right. On the same story, the BBC reported on the back of Zoopla's data. Hang on, sorry. Let's just do that. The BBC reported rents rise at 6.6% a year, but the pace is slowing. And this is data from Zoopla. Rents continue to grow faster than average earnings, although the gap is much narrower than a year ago. And he goes on to say that a continued slowdown in rental price growth to 5% by the end of this year. And Alex, what I wanted to just double check off the top of your head, am I right in saying that if nominal wage growth stays at the level it is now and rents fall, that would mean that real rent would be falling, right?
If not, if normal wage and rents fall. Yes.
Yeah, rough. So in other words, if
depending on the amounts, but yeah, I mean that would be the direction.
If nominal wage rises stay above 5% and rent growth slows to 5%, then of course at an individual level it affects everyone differently. But overall, that would be an improvement in the situation, wouldn't it? And it's in line with what you and I both expected, but it's just taking its sweet time. I remember saying,
technically, and I don't know if you may be able to answer as to why this is. If you look on Rightmove at rents in this area in Putney, there has been no reduction. Everything is still the same as it was 3 or 4 months ago, or slightly higher. But walking through the high street and looking in estate agents' windows, there are a number of properties of the same spec that appear to be on cheaper, but they're not on Rightmove. They're just in the windows of estate agents. I don't know if that has any meaning at all or is just an anomaly.
Well, you get the same problem with overvaluing in the lettings business that you do in sales, which is that in order to win a landlord's business, agents will often overvalue. And of course, landlords and agents both want to get the maximum rent that they can, generally speaking. And I think that, they will continue to want to show rents as being high, but I think actual deals being agreed are often being agreed below asking price in some areas, not in others, of course. But what you see in an estate agent's window could be for several different reasons, depending on what their tactics and strategy are. Sometimes they're just out of date because if it's physical paper, or were you looking at screens? Were these screens or was it physical?
Both. But what was interesting is that they were recent. They had not been on the market long. They'd never hit Rightmove. But for a 2-bedroom flat, let's say, they were £200 to £300 cheaper than the cheapest one that is shown on Rightmove.
Well, that's very interesting because, again, they know that everyone looks on Rightmove, and so to set price expectations to go there. But if it would also suggest to me that agent wants people coming in off the street. They want tenants. Perhaps they're actually slightly keener for tenants in some places than they were before, and that would be quite a good way to get tenants to walk in.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, so that was fact number one. Fact number two. Transaction volumes, which is really important. This is housing sales transaction volumes. The government released HMRC. This is HMRC, not Land Registry, not ONS. It's HMRC on the government website. And what I want everyone to pay attention to here is because in such a sensitive market that we're in now, I think this is relevant. So the red line is the seasonally adjusted line going back to April 2021. So back 3 years, right? We've got 3 years worth of data here. The green line is non-seasonally adjusted, or what I call actual figures. And the red line is just there to sort of smooth out the spikes and the troughs, which you can see that it does actually, right? But if you want to know, like when you're looking at year on year, I think seasonally adjusted makes more sense. But when month on month, they reported that transactions were up, and you saw lots of media outlets going, "Oh, transactions are up, transactions are up, transactions are up." But actually, look at the green line for the truth, and it is helpful that they put both there together. Actually, transactions stopped going up, having gone up the last 2 months, right? Having dropped down in January, but then picked up in February and picked up in March. They actually fell back in April. And what we can infer from that is that, and there's an increasing amount of data pointing this way, there was definitely an uptick in transactions in the first quarter of this year, no doubt. And in fact, I've seen a lot of completions. I've seen through the data that I have and the people that I deal with, I've seen a lot of completions happening in May, in fact, from deals that were agreed in Q1. So we're now just beginning to see the evidence of Q1's uptick in activity coming through in completions in the May data. But that transaction volume across the country dropping,
Charlie, Martha has made a good point, and she's right. This is non-residential.
Oh, sorry.
You need the other one.
Yeah.
There you go.
Where are we? Yeah. Okay. Oh God, I got that around my ears then, haven't I?
Yeah. It's the one underneath. There you go.
Oh, here we go. No, well, in that case, I have just been looking at the wrong graph. So that makes me feel quite silly. Dunce hat for Charlie.
That said, as you can see, I mean, you can't count 21 because 21 was utter madness.
Yeah.
But if you look back to say 14, which was after Help to Buy and wage recovery, 14 to 19, you'll see that we're still below that trend.
Yeah, exactly. And 29, and so the seasonally adjusted is still the red line. Yeah. It's trending up more than the green line. So okay. Let me get back to the actual numbers then, because I remember reading these numbers at the top and thinking, so seasonally adjusted is 10% higher than a year ago. And actually, non-seasonally adjusted is 17% higher than a year ago. But, and here we are, 9% lower than March. So, sorry, I was right. So the seasonally adjusted figure of residential, right? Can you just confirm I've got this right?
Yes, yeah, these are the right ones.
Right, 5% monthly increase on seasonally adjusted, but actually a 9% fall in non-seasonally.
In real numbers, yeah.
Oh, thank God for that.
Yeah.
I was really beginning to doubt my sanity at that point.
No, it's the same between resi and non-resi. We've got exactly the same setup. And the problem is when you compare it with the year earlier, we know that January to March of 23 was the massive panic. I mean, those were the biggest falls. So when you compare with the year earlier, and they say, oh, it's higher than 23. Well, yes, that's because in March and April of 23, things were absolutely dire. But in comparison with 14 to 19, so 2014 to 2019, we're still lower. And in fact, in real terms, we're still lower than we were the month before. So it's not as if the market is going up. April normally has a slight drop. But it's not exactly the ecstatic headlines that we saw across a lot of the media outlets.
And the relevance of this, is what bears repeating for everybody, right? Which is that if your interest is in making it easier to move, the more transactions that are happening, the easier it is to move. The fewer transactions that are happening, the harder it is to move. And so I am a massive fan of more transactions, which is why, and shorter transaction times, because that helps everybody, buyers, sellers, and agents alike. It's the one thing that everybody can get behind. More transaction volumes is good for everyone, including the economy. And a 9% drop compared to a 5% increase on season adjusted, that's my point. What I wanted to make out is for people who are looking at the market, and a lot of agents do this, they look at the news and go, oh, look, transactions in April are up. No, they're really not. They're down 9%. There's a 14% difference in seasonally adjusted and non-seasonally adjusted. And especially for an agent, what matters is what's actually happening. Oh, God, thank God. I feel like for a minute, I thought, I've gone mad. I was absolutely sure that these numbers definitely backed up what I was saying. And they do. So that's good. Right. Next point. We'll skip over this one just for this point. We'll come on to it more at the end. Nigel Farage, in the last 7 days, announced his intention to stand for election in Clacton and to become the leader of the Reform Party. Now, I think that single event, that single piece of news, is arguably the single biggest potential impact on the housing market. Potentially, and we'll discuss why later, the single biggest piece of news affecting the housing market in a very long time. In fact, I don't know of anything that's affected it as much since the mini budget fiasco, which just was an absolute curveball for the housing market at the time. Now, whether it's for better or worse, I don't know. And one of the comments I want to make on this just now is that I, this morning, took it upon myself to go and look across all 6 of the political parties' housing manifestos, including the Workers' Party, the GB Workers' Party, led by George Galloway. And just the headlines, right? The Lib Dems, by far, had the most detailed analysis and the most detailed policy suggestions of what they would do if they got into power. It genuinely surprised me. I've linked to it below. The Lib Dems were in a league of their own in terms of how much analysis and consideration and thinking and planning that they've given to how the reform, a lot of detail. Really impressive, actually. And on the other end of the and by the way, it was actually the Workers' Party who were the second most impressive on housing manifesto. George Galloway's manifesto has the word housing in it 19 times. Reform was number 3, and then the Green Party have not updated the housing manifesto on their website since 2010. 2010, 14 years since the Green Party.
In a tent, you bastard.
Stop! Don't go there yet. Don't trigger anybody. Even Labour does not have a housing policy section on its website anywhere. All it's got is a couple of press releases. One about house building intentions and changes, and gives baseless guff about what they're going to do. We're going to first dibs, right? First dibs on new build. It's one of those classic election manifesto things that means that first-time buyers in this country will get a first refusal on properties being built before foreign investors can buy them.
Yeah, how's that going to work for the developers?
This is my point. Like, you can imagine a builder's going, yeah, we'll just take longer and sell them for less when we've got rich overseas investors. Well, that's no problem. We'll do that. Come on.
Just ban foreigners from buying more than one property in the UK. There you go.
So Labour has no housing policy elaborated on its website at all. And then we get on to the Conservatives, who do not even have the word housing once anywhere on their whole website.
You're kidding.
Not one single instance of the word housing
Does it
appears.
say mansion or estate?
No.
No? Oh,
There is absolutely nothing on the Conservative Party website about housing. Actually, nothing.
It's nuts.
I'm speechless about that. Right, so this is fact number, I've lost count, 3 or 4.
3.
Okay, so Farage comes into the election, Reform comes into the election. That has created a lot of uncertainty in the election, which we'll come and discuss later. Next point. The next point is actually Labour's announcement last night. I'm going to try and remain impartial and cool and calm and collected here, but I am frustrated, and I'm deeply frustrated because this is the most likely party to win the election, and this is what they've managed to come up with. And
have you got some more helium just to get that balloon a little higher?
No, but okay, I'll get straight to the point, right? They've announced a mortgage guarantee scheme. And of course, the headlines make it sound like it's new, but it is not. It is literally nothing more than an extension of the existing 95% help to mortgage guarantee scheme by the government. It is literally, they're removing the expiration date of June 2025.
When did the Conservatives bring that in 21, was it?
Yeah, I think so. So this is a very old Conservative policy that Labour have gone, yeah, all right, we'll keep that. It changes nothing. And those 3 words. Okay, what have I said that the housing market needs? Change. What does this do? It changes nothing. And even by their own figures, look at that. 80,000 young people over the next 5 years. What's that? 16,000 a month, a year? That's just like, it's nothing. And it's a stoking demand rather than solving supply problem. And of course they said, oh yes, we're going to build 1.5 million houses, blah, blah, blah. But there is absolutely no substance or credibility that I can find anywhere about how they would deliver, because if they would, I would support it. I would be a Labour supporter and a Labour voter if I thought they had policies that would actually improve the housing market. Even manifesto promises that would actually, even if they had hollow promises that looked and sounded good and deliverable, I would probably support them. And this is what we're going to get. We're going to get nothing. We're going to get a big fat nothing burger and more of the same. And they are so toothless as a party. They're so toothless that all of this, we're going to make house builders give first dibs to first-time buyers. Yeah. It's just a joke. It's an absolute waste of space joke, and I'm frustrated and annoyed about it because basically that's what we're going to get, unless we'll come on to that later, right? Yeah, and then of course someone else has called it, Labour launches a help to buy style freedom to buy scheme.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last fact, so fact number 5. One moment. Is this one. And this is Europe, not the UK, but the European Central Bank decided to cut their rate this week by 0.25%, which was a mild surprise to me. I wasn't expecting it. I thought they were going to hold because their inflation is not easing as they'd hoped. We could talk about what this means and what it doesn't mean, but it's Europe, so it's not really that relevant. I don't think it's worth talking about. More than to say, I suspect it means that they are worried about their weakening economy, even though inflation is still not yet being tamed by them. I haven't asked you, Alex, if you have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's relevant in the same way the Bank of Canada did exactly the same thing. So we've had both the Canadians and Europe reduce their interest rate by 0.25%. That suggests to me that the global economy is finally feeling the fragility that it's really been suffering for ever since the COVID lockdowns. And before that, bear in mind, we were on the cards to head into a recession in this country in 2019, at the end of 2019, and that only disappeared because of all the COVID money that was made available. So yeah, I think this could be the beginning of that downturn. And I've told you many times that my expectation is that the Bank of England will reduce in August. Although I still don't see it for June for this month, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think this is directly from the ECB's website. So at the same time as having lowered the rates, they are saying that despite the progress over recent quarters, domestic price pressures remain strong as wage growth is elevated and inflation is likely to stay above target well into next year. The latest projections for both headline and core inflation have been revised up for 2024 and 2025 compared with March projections. So this is, I mean, that might be surprising you, isn't it, Alex? Because you've always been someone that's saying you're expecting inflation to fall off a cliff and turn into deflation. Do you think that's not going to happen now, or it's just taking a lot longer to get there?
Not really. I mean, okay. Bear in mind, inflation was 11.1%, really not very long ago. The fact that we're talking about numbers starting with 2, to my mind, is falling off a cliff. It's come down as fast as it went up, and everyone said inflation has rocketed up. Now, core inflation, different thing. Core inflation is remaining sticky, although, again, it's come down substantially. And we're going to see inflation here drop again in the next print. So, I would argue that inflation has fallen like a stone. And there are many people who suggest that target inflation shouldn't be at 2 or 2.5%, but should, in fact, in the modern economy, service industries, be around the 3 to 4% mark. Regardless of that, when we see inflation coming down as it has, but we see increased unemployment, certainly in Canada, you're seeing that. And then central banks start to cut rates whilst they're not at their target inflation, suggests that the economy is really fragile and weak, and that doesn't bode well. That suggests recession, which would then lead into the full-blown, potentially, deflation.
Yeah,
rather than just disinflation.
A lot of that coming out of the US as well. So there's there's a guy who does an American housing market commentary on YouTube saying that Florida properties have now effectively completely gone cold, and people are struggling to sell, and prices are turning. I haven't been paying close attention to that, but there we are. Those are the 5 facts anyway. So just a quick recap for those of you who've joined us in the beginning. The 5 facts of this 5 Fact Friday are rents have increased year on year, but not as much as the ONS says. Zoopla says that they're lower than the ONS does. That's fact number 1. Number 2, HMRC shows that housing transactions fell 9% in April from March. Fact number 3, the election, I think, just became a lot less certain than it was because Nigel Farage has entered the fray. Not because it's going to change the fact that Labour will get the most seats, but this is what I want to come on to talk about in a minute with you, Alex. It's no longer an absolute open goal for a majority, I don't think. And we'll discuss that in a minute. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I'll come on to that in a sec. Number 4, Labour has announced their freedom to buy scheme, which is basically just something that already exists that they're going to extend. So it's nothing new. And number 5, the ECB has cut their interest rate 0.25%, which means that there is a slightly higher chance that the Bank of England will cut their rate 0.25% at some point this year. And I agree with you, Alex, that August, they're not going to cut them in June. They might in August or September, whenever the date is. They might not. And my original guess that I made at the beginning of the year of 1 rate cut this year, I still think is probably the most likely outcome.
Depending on what happens with the economy, yes, potentially.
So